How could they turn their backs on a true hero? One sun-drenched morning in Pennsylvania, a man clad in a faded Marine Corps jacket stood silently at the edge of a university auditorium. In his hand, he gripped a handwritten note from his son. "Dad, I want you to sit in the front row." But the receptionist looked at him with scorn. To her, he was merely an old man in worn shoes, not a warrior who'd walked through fire and bullets. "Step back, or security will escort you out," she warned. He did not argue. He did not resist. He simply stood there, as steadfast as a mountain, amid the riot of balloons and camera flashes. Yet 6 Navy SEALs in the 5th row saw it all. They knew exactly who he was, and when they acted, the entire auditorium would fall silent. This is a story of honor, of loyalty, and of a forgotten father, a mystery that will hold you spellbound. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you won't miss other heart-stirring stories like this. Let's discover, how does someone rejected become the center of the world? The first rays of dawn had barely brushed the dew-soaked grass when Lisa Carter arrived at the St. Albans College parking lot. Her heart fluttered, not from the morning chill, but from something deeper stirring within her chest. The sky gleamed like glass, reflecting the silent hopes of hundreds of parents gathered here. Yet for Lisa, today marked the end of a solitary journey, one undertaken by a single mother alone, and the bold letters, Ryan Carter, valedictorian on the commencement program, stood as a radiant testament to all the years of struggle only she and her son understood. She stood there for a long moment, her fingertips tracing the edge of the paper as if imprinting every curve, every letter into memory. Countless times in the past, she had imagined this moment, but never had it felt as vivid as the reality unfolding before her. No one in the crowd knew she'd scrubbed floors at night and worked weekends as a cashier just to ensure her son's tuition for the coming year. Now, everything was quietly repaid, much like the way the sun gently warmed her skin. When she finally stepped into the auditorium, Lisa took her time. She observed. The cacophony of sounds swelled like a chaotic orchestra. Children's excited shrieks, laughter, voices calling across the rows. She felt small, yet not lost. Everything here was familiar, despite having visited only a handful of times, because a piece of her heart had lived in this place for the past 4 years, alongside Ryan. Guided to the 5th row, Lisa folded her jacket neatly in her lap. The chair's sturdy back was positioned squarely in the section reserved for families of distinguished graduates. From here, she could look straight at the stage, where her son would soon emerge in his gown, greeted by hundreds of gazes. But Lisa's eyes were busier than that. She scanned the room, absorbing the emotion etched on every face. Tearful mothers, proud fathers hiding their tears behind frames. To Lisa, each person here was living their own story. And then she saw him. Not because he sought attention. On the contrary, his silence carved a unique stillness amid the bustling throng. He did not enter through the main doors like everyone else. He emerged from a side exit beside the stage, a solitary figure adrift in the rushing current. His faded Marine Corps jacket draped over slender shoulders still carried an air of solemn dignity. The brass buttons had lost their shine, the sleeves frayed at the cuffs. He wore faded jeans, scuffed dark boots, and stood with his hands clasped behind his back. A posture so impeccable it seemed incongruous in such a hurried world. Lisa wondered why she was drawn to him. Something in his presence made her pause. He looked at no one, and no one looked at him. Yet he emanated a quiet force, flowing against the grain of the crowd, steady, undeterred, impossible to ignore. He did not take a seat. He simply watched, unhurried, not searching for anyone, as if he awaited a private signal only he could understand. Lisa sensed clearly. This was not a lost man, but someone who had arrived exactly where and when he was meant to be, though the world around him remained unaware. Everything unfolded at its own pace. Unlike the parents busy with phones, adjusting camera angles, checking names on the list, the man remained motionless. There was not a single wasted gesture, nor a hint of confusion. His bearing recalled the solemn statues of wartime memorials, not because he was old, but because he carried his own gravity, a silence that compelled one to steady their breath. Lisa felt herself clutch the program tighter, not from the cold, but because in that brief moment, she realized she was witnessing another chapter of this story, one unwritten, unannounced, yet ever present on the fringes of grand ceremonies like this. A veteran, with eyes full of understanding and a presence needing no acknowledgement. Outside, the sun climbed higher. Inside, Lisa still could not tear her gaze away from the man. She did not know who he was, why he was here, or how he related to the ceremony. But she knew one thing for certain. He had not arrived by chance. That was impossible. Lisa tilted her head slightly, her gaze never leaving the man standing in the distance. There was no hurry in him, no confusion, no sense of being lost, only a cold patience, as if he were guarding a moment known only to himself. No one noticed, but Lisa felt it keenly. He was not here just to witness a graduation ceremony. He carried something deeper, a silent purpose, one his eyes never strayed from. Then he began to move. His steps were slow and deliberate, weighted by years of discipline and untold history. He did not look around. He walked straight to the roped-off section, beneath the simple yet strict sign, "Distinguished Guests." There was an empty seat by the aisle, the perfect vantage point for someone about to take the stage. But before he could sit, a young woman wearing a headset stepped forward, blocking his way. She clutched the clipboard to her chest, lips pressed together, her eyes devoid of sympathy. "Sir, this area is reserved for designated family members," she said briskly and firmly, as though she'd repeated those words dozens of times already this morning. The man did not react at once. He nodded, a gesture as calm and immovable as stone. Then he spoke, his voice low and clear. "My son graduates today. My name is surely on the list." But the woman made no effort to check, no glance at the roster. She merely raised her hand, motioning him back. "Please step away, or security will remove you." Lisa held her breath. In that brief moment, she expected him to protest, to produce proof, to argue for his seat. But he did not. He uttered no further word. He stepped back, gently, without force. Yet that single retreat was not surrender. It was a choice. Lisa saw two security guards begin to move, silently, decisively, like shadows approaching a target. They said nothing, but their eyes were alert, their bodies tense as if awaiting orders. The surrounding crowd remained oblivious. They were busy straightening their children's ties, adjusting camera angles, smiling at shouts of "Say cheese!" The noise resembled waves crashing against cliffs, yet no one sensed the small storm brewing just steps away. But Lisa saw, and she was not alone. 6 men, seated in the 5th row a few seats to her right, had not taken their eyes off that man since the moment he stepped inside. They spoke no words, whispered no secrets, yet their gazes were identical, intense, guarded, and beneath it all, marked by a ruthless familiarity. Perhaps they had known him once. Perhaps they had stood alongside him in battle, or faced him at a moment too difficult to recount. The man now stood beneath the blazing red exit sign. He leaned lightly against the wall, back straight, hands still clasped behind him, chin lifted ever so slightly. Yet his eyes no longer watched the row before him. Instead, they were fixed firmly on the stage, as if he were on watch, as if there was something he needed to see with his own eyes before he could leave. Then the ceremony began. The speakers crackled to life. The principal's formal voice welcomed students, parents, and distinguished guests. Thunderous applause followed, mingling with cheers, camera clicks, and flashing lights. The auditorium shimmered with emotion. Laughter erupted when the principal gently joked about the high cost of tuition and today's weather. But Lisa did not laugh. All the lights in the hall seemed to fade in her mind. Her eyes were riveted on the man standing motionless by the exit. He did not move. He remained unmoved by the applause or the microphone's roar. And neither did the 6 men by her side. Their eyes did more than observe. They watched. A tense, vigilant watch, as though anticipating something that could happen at any moment. Lisa did not know what was unfolding, but she felt it clearly. A current running beneath the surface of this ordinary ceremony. Something unspoken, yet perceptible to those attuned to it, exactly as she felt now, crisp and chilling. That man was not simply a father attending a graduation, nor merely a veteran donning an old jacket to honor a milestone. He carried something more, a purpose, a story untold. And someone was watching him, determined to prevent it from unfolding. Lisa tightened her grip. A ripple of unease settled in her chest, not from fear, but from the instinct that this moment held meaning, and that very soon nothing would remain as calm as it appeared on that stage. The young woman with the headset swept past the rows again, her expression taut. This time she was accompanied by a uniformed staff member. They stopped a few feet from Lisa and exchanged a few hushed words, just enough not to disturb the crowd listening to the speech. "He's still standing there," the woman whispered, glancing toward the man beneath the exit sign. "I don't think he was invited." Her companion merely nodded, a slight loaded nod, then replied cautiously, "I'll have security keep an eye on him." Lisa heard every word, not because she strained to listen, but because her gaze remained fixed on that man, involuntarily capturing each movement, each suspicious look cast his way. A tremor of disquiet passed through her chest. Not fear, but a heavy sense of injustice, as if someone were insulting a silent emblem. That man, in his worn uniform, with that composed stance and abyssal eyes, was no troublemaker. Far from it. He was an old, forgotten fragment, a witness to something the world had left behind. No invitation, no honored seat. A young graduate stepped up to the podium, dressed immaculately in a tailored suit, confidence radiating from his poised smile and perfectly groomed hair, just like a TV star. According to the program, he was the principal's son, the very embodiment of holding the future in his hands, as cliched speeches often proclaim. Lisa watched him, then glanced around the silent audience, awaiting the golden words they believed embodied success. He began with the usual thanks to parents, faculty, friends, and the remarkable experiences at this institution that have shaped us into pioneers of a new generation. His tone was flawless, his gaze agile, every phrase meticulously chosen. Then he offered a slight smile and a glance toward the front rows. "And a special thanks," he said, "to the perfect families seated here. You remind us of this school's true value." A polite ripple of laughter spread through the hall, affirming, proud. A few heads nodded, a few hands applauded softly. But Lisa remained unmoved. Her heart skipped a beat. The words sounded like praise, but the tone carried an unmistakable sting of mockery. And that student's eyes, a hidden blade beneath velvet. She didn't turn around immediately, yet the sense was undeniable. The man at the back wasn't smiling, nor were the 6 men seated nearby. Not a sigh, not a flicker of reaction. They simply exchanged glances, a fleeting connection, yet suffocatingly heavy. The tall man in a baseball cap, his hair cut short as if fresh from the barracks, leaned toward his neighbor. "He was referring to him," he whispered, not loud, but resolute. The others nodded, needing no more explanation. Lisa felt it clearly. This was no coincidence. Everything was laden with meaning. Not everyone would catch it, but those who had known combat, who had survived days when life and death hung on a breath, would recognize it. And that man, he stood there, without a frown, without shifting position. Yet his hands, the hands that had once held a rifle, that had lifted a comrade from the line of fire, were clenched around something invisible. Perhaps a letter, perhaps a small keepsake, or simply a pain that had never been named. Lisa turned back to the stage, where the student continued his speech as if nothing had happened. His voice rang out steadily, but to her, every sound had dulled. Those words were no longer expressions of gratitude. They were velvet-coated blades, applause steeped in oblivion. She glanced behind her, toward the man standing like a monument nobody dared touch. And in that instant, within his gaze, she saw a silent sorrow, heavy, unspoken. In that moment, Lisa knew 2 things, etched into her mind as if carved in stone. First, this man had not come to cause a scene. Though he was rejected and misunderstood, he chose to remain steadfast, to endure in silence, just as he had done countless times before, a past no one ever bothered to ask about. Second, someone here had made a grave mistake, not by accident, but by intention. An intentional forgetting of who truly deserved honor, and that mistake was now growing, unnoticed, within this seemingly peaceful hall. Lisa clenched her fists, fighting the urge to rise, yet inside her, something shifted, as if all the laughter, the lights, and the gilded speeches had lost their weight when a man like him was left behind. No one mentioned him, no one welcomed him, but he remained standing, driven by a reason strong enough to defy every doubtful glance, and Lisa knew this moment was far from small. It was the beginning of something far greater. The next name was announced, and the auditorium burst into crisp applause. Camera flashes lit up the room, capturing the glorious moment everyone had been waiting for, the day their child would step onto the stage, receive a diploma, and mark a major milestone in their life. But Lisa, amid the surging tide of emotion flooding the hall, kept her gaze fixed behind her. There, the man in the faded Marine Corps jacket still stood motionless, like a silent relic of the past no one dared revisit. Once more, the young woman with the headset approached, this time clutching a clipboard labeled "Security." There was something in her stride that made Lisa sense the boundaries were about to be breached. Then a security guard emerged from the side aisle, moving slowly but decisively toward the man. The air in that corner of the room suddenly thickened, as if time had paused for a few fleeting seconds. Lisa saw the man turn slightly, leaning in to catch words too soft for her to hear. But his expression said it all. No anger, no surprise, only a slow, steady shake of the head, as if dismissing a familiar frustration. Then he spoke in a husky yet resolute voice. Lisa could read his lips. "I'm not causing trouble. My son invited me. I'm not leaving until I see him on stage." The guard stood tall, his tone sharp as a blade. "Sir, you need to come with me." Lisa glanced around, expecting someone to intervene, but the auditorium remained immersed in each family's private joy, laughter, calls of names, camera shutters, a thick veil preventing them from seeing what was unfolding just steps away. In that bustling crowd, only the 6 men in the 5th row continued to follow him, unblinking, unwavering. Lisa leaned toward the woman beside her, a school administrator with a name tag pinned to her lapel, and whispered, "Do you know who he is?" The woman barely glanced over, then shook her head without hesitation. "Probably just someone in the wrong place. There's always an extra body at these ceremonies." The word extra stabbed at Lisa's heart like a knife. She turned back to the man once more, this time studying him closely, his face etched with the lines of time and endurance, his silvering hair uneven, his left shoulder slightly cocked, perhaps from an old injury or from years of shouldering a military pack. His faded jacket, threadbare and nearly shapeless, was nonetheless worn with care. Not to flaunt it, but because it was the best he had, perhaps the only thing he possessed. Lisa didn't understand why she felt so moved. Perhaps it was his eyes, the eyes of a father who had waited a lifetime for a small seat in a grand ceremony. No fanfare, no trumpets, just the chance to watch his child grow up and complete a journey. Then she heard the rustle of paper, a sound so faint almost no one noticed, but to her it shattered the weight in her chest. He slowly reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a piece of paper folded into quarters. The edges were soft and crumpled from being handled countless times, each crease a testament to sleepless nights, perhaps, or to bus rides where hope was all he had. He extended the note, not as a challenge, but as a silent plea. Lisa saw him form the words on his lips. "My son wrote this." A gentle breeze from the air conditioner brushed past, yet Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. In that instant, she could almost see the blue ink on the paper, just a few lines, enough to pierce the heart of any mother sitting there. "Dad, I want you to sit in the front row." Lisa swallowed hard. Her throat tightened. She did not know who that son was. She did not know who the man was, and she could not fathom why a father, bearing his child's handwritten invitation, would be treated as an unwelcome intruder. Perhaps that note was all he had. Perhaps he had dared not ask anyone, had dared not request any special favor. He had simply come early, stood silently, and waited. Waited until his son's name was called, so that, at least once, he could see his dream come true, not for himself, but for the child he had spent his life raising. Lisa looked back to the stage, where students beamed and waved to their families amid the stirring music, but she could not share their joy. Not when, behind her, a father was being treated like a stranger. Not when that small piece of paper, smallest of all, yet bearing the greatest love, was deemed insufficient to let him stay. She turned again, catching his eyes at just that moment. There was no reproach, no plea, only a profound resolve, as though he would remain standing there, even if pushed out, even if unwelcome, until his son appeared on that stage. And Lisa knew, should they remove him, it would not be just one father ushered from the auditorium. It would be an entire generation, its loyalty, its sacrifice, being rejected on the very ground they once defended with everything they had. The receptionist remained unmoved, her lips pressed tight as though the slightest softness might crack her resolve. "No guest pass, no seat," she snapped, harsh as a rulebook on the wall, dousing any hope without a second thought. Her words struck the air like a slap, aimed squarely at the dignity of a man who had devoted his life to something this hall, perhaps, had never fully understood. He did not react. He simply exhaled. A long, deep breath, as if resigning himself to yet another familiar defeat. He nodded. Then he stepped back once more, not so much retreating, but yielding way to a world that had never made room for him. That gesture set Lisa's throat ablaze, not from weakness in him, but from a rage that sprang from her core. An indignation not for herself, but for him, and for all those like him, those whom modern society had forgotten, or worse, quietly excluded. Lisa opened her mouth to speak. She wanted to protest, to say something to shatter the silent loop the crowd had embraced. But no words were needed. A faint sound, like the scrape of a chair, echoed behind her, then another, then many more. In unison, 6 men from the 5th row rose almost in the same heartbeat. No shout, no thunderous noise, but their collective movement shifted the room's gravity toward them. Lisa turned, her heart pounding as she beheld them. 6 stalwart figures, silent yet weighty, as though all the honor and history they carried had coalesced in this moment. The tallest among them, eyes sharp as blades beneath the brim of a faded cap, strode down the aisle. Unhurried, unpretentious, yet each step bore an unspoken resolve. He advanced directly toward the Marine Corps veteran who was being forced out. Stopping before him, he bowed his head ever so slightly, not in deference, but as a mark of recognition. Then he slipped a hand inside his jacket and produced a small object, the stage lights glinting off his fingertips. A golden badge with outstretched silver wings and a miniature trident at its center, the unmistakable insignia of a Navy SEAL. He spoke no more. He simply held the badge aloft and turned to the motionless guard nearby. Immediately, the second man stepped forward, flanking him, then the third, the fourth, until all 6 formed an unbreakable line, not to conceal, but to declare. They needed no rallying cry, no recounting of past deeds. Their presence, their stance, and their gaze fixed on the Marine said it all. The tallest man faced the guard, his voice calm but thunderous in its weight. "He is not leaving this room. He led us through hell. He stays here." Not another word was necessary. The space seemed to freeze. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Cameras paused mid-click. Some heads turned, others squinted, confused, but feeling the unfamiliar tension that had seeped into this celebration of congratulations. Lisa looked to the man at the heart of this silent circle. He did not smile. He did not nod in gratitude. He offered no triumphant gesture. He simply stood, eyes cast downward, as though striving to contain an emotion too vast for words. For him, this was no moment of pride, no vindication, no restoration of honor. It was simply his right to remain. For his son. For the promise penned in blue ink on that crumpled scrap of paper. Lisa glanced at the guard, who minutes ago had spoken with rock-hard resolve. Now he stood mute, his gaze wavering between the SEAL's line, the gleaming gold and silver badge, and the growing awareness spreading through the auditorium. The young receptionist retreated a step, clutching her clipboard. Her eyes were wide, not with firmness as before, but with bewildered surprise. And amid all these shifts, one thing remained unchanged. The Marine veteran uttered no further word. Perhaps his whole life had been spent in silence, accustomed to sacrifices unacknowledged, used to passing through crowds whose faces never remembered his name. But today, 6 men, once comrades in unnamed missions of life and death, had stood up for him, not for privilege, not for protocol, but for truth. For some things require no invitation, no guest pass, no reserved seat. They require only honor. And a handwritten promise. Dad, I want you to sit in the front row. A deep, authoritative voice rang out from the left side of the auditorium, neither loud nor harsh, yet weighted, as if it could halt the flow of time in that instant. Every eye turned toward the man who had just risen, tall, salt and pepper hair, and on his chest, a row of gleaming medals beneath his crisply tailored gray jacket. Lisa recognized him at once. From the way he stood, disciplined yet unostentatious. He was a career officer. No name tag needed, no introduction required. He was a colonel. He did not need a microphone. With a seasoned, resonant tone, he pronounced each word as though reading a battlefield report. I know that man. Not a sound followed. Silence stretched and deepened, like water held back by a dam. He is Master Sergeant John Bradley, the colonel continued, deliberate as a vow, of the 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, U.S. Marine Corps, now retired. A murmur rippled through the hall. Lisa held her breath. That name, John Bradley, was no longer a shadow at the back entrance. It carried weight, history, the cost of blood and sacrifice. In 2006, the colonel went on, during Operation Firewatch in Kandahar, I witnessed him run into a burning building under heavy fire to rescue 5 fellow Marines. He waited for no orders. He simply went in. Those words fell like thunder on a clear day. No embellishment, no flourish, just an undeniable truth. He was the only man to emerge. The colonel's voice dropped, carrying each one on his back. The room stilled, as if draped in a heavy curtain. No movement, no laughter, only the silence of those who realize they have erred. And that mistake now stood before them in flesh and bone. The colonel sat down without awaiting applause. For him, the truth was plain. Then, from the stage, swift footsteps echoed, urgent, decisive. A young man in a black graduation gown descended the steps, parting the crowd as though driven by an uncontainable purpose. It was Ryan Carter. His hand trembled lightly around the microphone, yet his gaze was unwavering. He did not read from a script. He did not consult a page. He simply looked up and faced the man standing beside 6 SEALs, in an auditorium caught between shock and awe. That is my father, Ryan said, his voice neither loud nor timid, but enough to carry through the hall. Every morning he tells me, stand tall, keep going, be someone you can be proud of when you look in the mirror. No more whispers, no skeptical glances, only an empathetic hush. Ryan stepped down from the stage, moved through the rows of seated figures like a beam of light, and walked straight to his father's side. He halted before his father, standing at attention as he'd been taught. Then he saluted. No one told him to. No one asked him to. It was a choice of the heart. But Sergeant Bradley did not return the salute. Instead, he did something else. He opened his arms wide, drew his son into a fierce embrace, a simple hug, unassuming, yet carrying a lifetime of silence and waiting. The 6 SEALs snapped to attention together, hands raised in salute, a silent ritual for the man who once led them through the line between life and death. They looked at no one else. They sought no approval. They saluted because their hearts demanded it. The room held its breath. Ryan turned, took his father's hand, and led him forward, not backward, but onward. They passed the rows where Bradley had been turned away, pushed aside as if he'd lost his way. This time, no one stopped them. No scrutinizing glances remained. No clipboards or receptionists barred the path. The young officer guided his father into the very front row seat. Then the audience rose. The applause thundered like a tide. No prompting, no rehearsal, just the raw surge of respect. No one needed to be told. Everyone understood. They were applauding not just an old soldier, but all he stood for: resilience, sacrifice, and a father's quiet, steadfast love. Lisa felt tears sting her eyes. Bradley sat down, gently unfolded the worn note in his hand, and reread his son's words. This time, not to prove anything, but to honor them. After the ceremony, students approached him quietly. They did not ask for photos nor signatures. They shook his hand, rested a hand on his shoulder. A wordless thank you. A young SEAL, stern-faced yet reverent-eyed, offered him a small token, a challenge coin engraved with the words, "Silent warrior of the loudest battles." Bradley clasped the coin in his hand. His shoulders sagged slightly, not in fatigue, but as if a burden, long carried alone, was finally shared. Lisa watched them, the father, the son, 6 comrades standing silently, and an auditorium no longer indifferent. She knew this moment was not about glory, medals, or rank. It was about a man who had always stood firm, in silence, about a son who never forgot, and about a generation that, at last, turned back and bowed. Some stories don't need grand speeches. They need only a tight embrace, a look of understanding, and a worn piece of paper with handwritten words. Master Sergeant John Bradley's story isn't just about war or valor. It's a reminder that those who deserve our highest honor are often the quietest in the crowd. They don't need a stage to be seen. They need only a gaze of recognition from the ones they love. If this story moved you, give it a like to honor the silent fathers. Share it to spread the true value of gratitude. And leave a comment. Who is the Bradley in your life? Because sometimes one small act today can make someone know they're not alone. Join us in telling the stories that deserve to be heard.